Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability webinar. My name is Catherine Walker. I'm today's facilitator. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to cover a few rules, especially for those of you that are new to WebEx. Because there are so many of you, all participants are currently in listen-only mode. At any time during the presentation, if you need help, you can post a question in the chat box on the side of your screen, and we'll be happy to help you out. At the end of the session, there will be a time for questions. You can either post questions in the Q&A section or in the chat box. If you want your question to stay private, please type private before your question and we won't mention your name. You can also email questions to nccjdinfo@thearc.org. If we don't get to your question during the presentation, we'll follow up with you afterwards. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. We will send you an email letting you know when it's available, and during the presentation, we're going to ask you to answer a few questions. These questions help us document your involvement for our funders, so please participate. We have one final request. You will receive a session evaluation after this webinar. Please take 5 minutes to complete and send it to us. This webinar is funded by the United States Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance. Thank you for your participation. The webinar today is the 7th of NCCJD's monthly webinars and features David Whalen, Project Director for First Responders Disability Awareness Training, and Police Officers Chief John Askey and Captain Patrick Mann.
And hello, everyone. This is Leanne Davis. I am the Program Manager for the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. And I just wanted to take a few seconds to welcome you to today's webinar and thank Dave Whalen for being our speaker today. Dave has been just a wonderful asset to our project, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to say thank you to him for being our speaker today, and we look forward to hearing everything you have to share. He's been involved in this topic for many years and brings a great deal of expertise, and I know that you will have some really good questions for him, so please feel free to jump in with those questions at any time during this. You can post them in the chat box, and I hope that we have some good discussion afterwards. So thank you for being here, Dave, and thank you to all of our participants as well.
All right. Now, before we welcome our presenters, we want to start with a couple of questions. Again, this is to help us report to our funder what you guys are taking away from this. So the first polling question that we have asks, what factors are most challenging for law enforcement when it comes to incorporating new training into their department? Oh, I think I opened the wrong polling question. You guys can go ahead and participate in this poll if you see that on the right-hand side of your screen. All right, here we go. Here's the question. What factors are most challenging for law enforcement when it comes to incorporating new training into their department? as, and you can check all that apply here. You can check more than one answer. All right, last question. As recognized by the U.S. Attorney General's Office, the most discriminated against population in America is? All right, thank you everyone for your participation. I'm going to pass it off now to our wonderful presenters.
University, we 4 years ago received a grant from the New York State Developmental Disabilities Planning Council to develop first responder disability awareness plan. First responder is defined as law enforcement, firefighter, emergency medical services, and 911 operators. What we have done in Niagara is develop a train-the-trainer program for law enforcement, firefighter, EMS is a combined training. We're in the process of developing 911 operator training. What we're going to talk about today is how to train law enforcement and proper response to people with disabilities. Accompanying me, as noted earlier, is Captain Mann from the Buffalo Police Department. 27 years of service, I believe, Captain? 28. 28 years of service for Captain Mann. Captain is the training coordinator for the Buffalo Police Department. He is also active in Special Olympics in the local area. Also accompanying, and I should state this, Captain Mann has also gone through the training program, so he is now a trained officer in disability awareness training. And he'll talk about his plans for his department in a little bit. Also joining me is Chief John Askey, Town of Amherst. Town of Amherst is one of the largest towns in the state of New York, with a population of close to 120,000 residents. This is the town that I reside in. I chair our town's committee on disabilities as well. And Chief Askey's been a big help. Both Captain Mann and Chief Askey have been a big help and provider and direction on how to properly set up programs and continue to guide. This is an ongoing process. While we developed training almost 2.5 years ago, final product for law enforcement, we continue to find more ways to improve, to enhance, and to provide better education and tools for officers in their everyday challenges. We will only focus today on law enforcement disability awareness training. We will not be focusing on firefighter, EMS, or 911 operators training, although very essential just the same. What we're going to start you off with here is just some cases that can become very challenging for law enforcement that many of you are probably aware of. Knowing we have a very wide array of attendees in our training today, from police departments to disability advocates, parents, individuals with disabilities, service providers, we understand that some of you may be a little bit more ahead of the curve in what is occurring out there, but the concern nonetheless is great. Some of you are probably very aware of the Senate hearing that occurred on April 29th, bringing this topic to a national level of recognition in the United States Senate, which tells you that this is certainly garnering much attention. So challenges that we see out there is individuals with autism, a case here that occurred in Virginia. It's stated here, arrested for epilepsy, an individual who had a seizure who was arrested while having a seizure. Deaf man tased, pepper sprayed by mobile officers for staying in a bathroom too long. This gentleman also has an intellectual disability. And then conversely, some of the challenges relative to victimization, which we'll address in a little bit as well. This is an incident that occurred in Buffalo, just south of Buffalo, New York, in Whalen, New York, with a woman, Laura Cummings, who had an intellectual disability, who was in essence tortured to death by her mother and half-brother, which brings to light some of these serious issues of abuse, victimization, that can be as horrific as someone losing their life. So we understand that officers have challenges, and officers understand that they have challenges, and hence the reason we've developed what we're doing. I should state further, too, that our program here at Niagara University has an advisory council with Captain Mann and Chief Askey also sit on. Our advisory council goes right across the disability community to include all disability representatives, people who are active within their disability, within the spectrum of their disability. So, for instance, the person who represents the blind community, she is blind and sits on the National Federation of the Blind New York State chapter. New York State self-advocate presence, and right across, again, the disability spectrum. We also have all first responders sitting on this, as well as service providers, parents of people with disabilities, and staff members from the university. Why does law enforcement need disability awareness training? 50 to 80% of our officers encounters are with a person with a disability. This stat comes from the Department of Justice. So as recognized as at the highest level of justice in this country, at least half of an officer's day is encountering a person with a disability. One of the things I found in doing our trainings is that many officers initially might question that number. Once we get about a quarter of the way through the training, they realize, wow, I guess that number is legitimate. So we highly stress to law enforcement the need to go through the training and obviously have an understanding of it, because at least half of their days will be encountered by statistics. Quite frankly, with a lack of awareness, we've had police departments sued, bad public relations, unwarranted arrest, or even death of an individual with disability. I'm sure many people are aware of the tragic death of Robert Ethan Saylor, to name one person, but we have many other incidents we're aware of just the same. And rest assured, there's no officer in the country that wants that as an end result. But because of a lack of understanding and awareness, that has not brought this training or information to attention, we could have some bad end results. And then from the victimization standpoint, again, noting a person with a disability is 7 times more likely to be a victim of a crime. And if you go deeper into some statistics, we've had statistics say that 72% of females with an intellectual disability will be sexually assaulted or abused. That number for males is 30%. So again, some real horrific numbers relative to the victimization and abuse. The significance of that is that officers are not always going to encounter a person who may be doing something that's considered criminal. Officers will be encountering people who are victims, but will pose differently relative to investigations and questions, and we want to be sure that the officers are trained in how to receive or retrieve information most accurately, so that the person who is a victim, his rights are upheld when it gets down the road into the judicial process. So encounters. Where would a police officer encounter an individual, a victim of a crime, as we just stated? An offender, And we'll talk a little bit more about individuals with developmental disabilities, individuals with mental health. If you've been following the stories relative to law enforcement response to people with disabilities, there just a week or so ago, USA Today had an article on mental health and law enforcement's role with that, which is not necessarily appropriate relative to not receiving other services, say crisis services or mental health courts. So we find many people with mental health who are finding themselves in the presence of law enforcement, although the crime was not necessarily committed, and the supports for them to be attended to their needs specifically are not out there. Someone who runs away from a residence, say someone with autism who is a bolter or elopes. A confused citizen, someone with more involved intellectual disability, someone with dementia. A medical emergency. Quite frankly, individuals with disabilities may have a higher incidence of medical need. My son's friend, who has a physical disability, 3 times in 11 months was hospitalized with the need for emergency medical services to be at the house. Many of those 911 calls, and officers also accompany on that call and may have some insight that could better assist the EMT or the firefighter. Witness to a crime. And I think some of the officers can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that go with witnesses. Captain Mann has a case that he'd like to share with you relative to an individual who witnessed a homicide.
Several years ago, the Buffalo Police Department had a homicide, and our homicide unit developed some leads. An individual came in to confess to the crime. In talking to the individual, he had information that only the perpetrator would know. The end result being that the guy that came in to confess to the crime wasn't the actual suspect. The actual suspect encouraged this individual who had several disabilities, intellectual and others, that the suspect was encouraging him to confess to it because he figured if that guy got caught, he wouldn't. The end result being our detectives did the investigation, found out it wasn't this guy, even though he adamantly admitted that he was there and he did it, and the right suspect was arrested. But this isn't just a single instance. This is multiple instances where things like this happen.
Domestic violence and abuse. And again, we've talked a lot about that. Domestic violence, not necessarily so far, but domestic violence is another area where we find individuals with certain disabilities at the wrong end of it, unfortunately. Calls for caregiver requests for assistance. The 911 call that goes out says, I need help with my son or daughter. And again, for some of you who follow this field and this topic here more closely, you've probably been exposed to that. I should note that on our website, which I'll show you at the end of this presentation, we have many incidents that have challenged law enforcement. Some of those come from a call from a caregiver, parent, family member. Conversely, we have service provider agencies and group homes who may also be challenged by behaviors and call 911. Although maybe a different topic area or discussion for another time, that is not always encouraged. What then happens is if you're calling for law enforcement assistance, they're going to need to do their job, even though the result that you're looking for, like someone possibly being handcuffed or the need for law enforcement to be involved in ways that they're trained to be involved in challenging behaviors, might not be what we want to see as an end result, but if you're making that call, that might just be what happens. Public transportation. 25% of Americans who use public transportation have a disability. So in the Buffalo area, we have the Niagara Frontier Transportation Authority. So we have our own law enforcement entity that is involved in directly dealing with people who use public transportation, as well as every other officer who might be called to a bus or a subway or what have you. But 1/4 of people on public transportation have a disability. And just to point out statistically what the U.S. Census tells us, we basically, our country, 1 out of 5 Americans has a disability. You see 19.3%. In the state of New York, 20.6%. So if you look at each state, it pretty much rides between 18 and I believe the highest state in the country is Alaska with 22%. But for all intents and purposes, 1 out of 5 Americans have a disability. You can see here, almost 10% have a physical disability, almost 5% have a mental disability, and almost 4% have a sensory disability. This makes it the largest minority in the country. So we go back to one of the questions, as recognized by the U.S. Attorney General's office, what is the most discriminated population in America? It is people with disabilities. So we have the highest office in the country relative to law enforcement jurisdiction, noting that the disabled population is the most discriminated against. All this ties in relative to disability awareness training. It ties into what officers need to be aware of in their interactions. So the chapters in our program are this. And what we're going to do throughout the course of this webinar is inform you of what we provide here within our program and how it works. And Chief and Captain will get more specific to that towards the end of the program here as far as training law enforcement and some of the challenges that go with it. You had a question that you were asked on that. If you answered all of the above, you were correct. But we will talk about what we do here with this. I should note, I've been doing disability awareness training for 12 years. I've been in the field of disability since 1986. I've done about 500 disability awareness trainings. All trainings, for all intent and purposes, are customized to meet the audience's needs. So as I stated to you, we have firefighter EMS training trainer. That is about 40% different than our law enforcement training. The challenges that an officer will face are going to be different than what a firefighter faces or what a team faces. So we want to be very specific to what their needs are and not go too much longer. Conversely, we understand that, for instance, we can train on autism for 3, 5, 7 hour, it could be a 7-hour course. But what the officers will talk about is the challenges that go with longer hours and training within their departments. So as you see here, we are addressing all of the areas specific within each disability in our training program that an officer would have to encounter and what he or she would need to know relative to proper response. We, within our program, have brought in subject matter experts. So every section you see here was worked on and developed for all intent and purposes with an individual who is either has a disability or is a subject matter expert on the disability. And we are continuing here. I'm going to go back a bit. I didn't read that. I apologize for anyone who might have challenges in seeing the screen. So our chapters are autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, blind/low vision, deaf/hard of hearing, dementia, intellectual disability, learning disability, physical disabilities, Tourette syndrome, discrimination and inclusion, abuse and victimization, person-first language, speech impairments, outreach, or how to properly outreach to the disability community, and mental health. Now, I should note, New York State, that within the basic course, and I'll let the Chief and the Captain talk more about the basic course in a minute, we have 14 hours on mental health. In New York State, we have 2 hours on persons with disabilities. So we don't feel that's enough. We also feel that within the basic course, there's a lot that new recruit has learned. I'm going to let the Captain and the Chief talk about the basic course and how law enforcement gets trained at the academy level.
So I was saying that, thanks, Dave. Right now, we'd like to talk about 2 different kinds of training. There's the initial recruit training. It's very important to set the stage for the officers earlier. And then there's obviously the ongoing training throughout there. We're going to make sure that they get everything that they need. I think I would say, Dave, that they're probably getting, may not be getting enough, but they're probably getting just about very close to all you can put in that initial training, only because there are an awful lot of other things that they have to cover, whether it's defensive tactics, defensive driving, whatever the topics might be, there's lots of that. The officers in New York State are getting approximately 640 hours of training in that basic academy. And like Dave said, it does include 14 hours of mental health training and 2 hours with regard to disabilities. I've looked through the training syllabus just a little while ago, only to refresh myself. It's been years since Captain and I have gone through the academy. But there are a lot of things that would touch on the disabilities, maybe not directly, but would have some application. Those might be classes in communications or law or mental hygiene law, things of that nature. So there are an awful lot of opportunities for us to hear about how they are serving the disabled community or how they can serve it better. But it's, I agree with Dave completely that it's we can do more in the academy, and we certainly need to do more and more as we develop our officers throughout their career. We're going to provide the kind of service that we all want to provide to our community.
Captain, if you want to add on the basic course, I know you trained some in the basic course for the very county law enforcement, Captain.
I would just have to agree with Chief Askey on that. How there's a lot of cross-referencing no matter what it is. I know specifically that when we talk about searching individuals, the issue of searching individuals with disabilities is always part of it, because you've got to realize that people with disabilities also fit into, unfortunately, sometimes they're suspects and the perpetrators, but you also have to understand, as Chief said, communication and communicating with people. So there is a lot of crossover in there.
One more thing I'd add, David, I think that that's probably fairly common across law enforcement agencies across the country. We all do things in a somewhat similar manner. But what I would like to emphasize is that what you'll learn about the training that Dave's organization presents, First Responders Disability Awareness Training, it allows the full spectrum of disabilities are addressed. And that doesn't happen in the basic academy. That doesn't happen in ongoing recruit or officer training. What this training service provides is an opportunity to cover all the broad spectrum of disabilities, and that's important. Officers are getting little bits and pieces, a lot of stories, a lot of good training, but until we receive this training, we haven't covered all the bases.
Thank you, Chief and Captain. One of the pieces that we talk about, especially you see with outreach, the outreach bullet, is that we want to connect, and what we do is connect the law enforcement department, the police departments, I should say, with their local community. So while this training is designed to be done by a trained officer, and I'll have the Captain and Chief talk about officers doing training, it's important that they understand how to make easy connections with the community in their area. And what we find is that once those connections are made, then officers have a comfort level with working with people from the blind community, people from the autism community, and even encouraging them to bring individuals to come in and train with them as a co-presenter. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So I just want to give you a couple of disabilities here that do not fall under the developmental disability spectrum, but to understand the challenges across all disabilities. Note here, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If you can't read the bars, I'll go across here. When arrested, the first one going left to right. If you see the higher bar, that is individual with ADHD, and the lower bar is a control group. Multiple arrests. Convicted. Multiple convicted and incarcerated. So just to note that here's a disability between ADHD and learning disability that are, in this country, the two most arrested disabilities, is probably not the best way to put it. The two disabilities or groups of individuals with these disabilities that are arrested in this country. If you note here, the skills most often affected with learning disability is those of you with this group would know: reading, writing, listening, speaking, reasoning, and doing math. Impact of learning disability without supports or services. It's key to note that it's not people with learning disabilities in these numbers. Without the proper supports or services, as parents who don't understand their child with learning disability have never received those supports, as educators who don't recognize the child, young adults, learning disability that have never properly addressed it in the education system. If you look at that bottom bullet there, 31% of adolescents with LD without proper supports will be arrested 3 to 5 years out of high school. 1/3 of individuals with LD will be arrested 3 to 5 years out of high school. So it's very important to note that across the disability spectrum, when we talk disability in front of officers, we need to make sure that they hear all disabilities and not just a specific one. We also need to keep in mind that many disabilities, there's a comorbidity or even a tertiary disability, a secondary or tertiary disability or comorbid. For instance, learning disability, ADHD, are up to 50% comorbid. Those are two distinct different disabilities, but yet pose challenges. We want to educate officers that these disabilities exist and that this is what they're encountering and how to understand them. So specific to our audience and to the services that the ARC and the National Center for Criminal Justice and Disability provide, intellectual disability in the law. So individuals will likely experience difficulty at each stage of the judicial process. That's from the initial encounter with an officer right through to booking jail, if they're going to, say, county jail overnight, into the court system. We've had discussion on, many discussions exist on mental health courts. There's 384 of them in the country. We need to take a good look at more court and support in the judicial system relative to even offender courts. In the Buffalo area, we have a program run by an agency called Alternatives to Incarceration. It's strictly for individuals with intellectual disability. Works with the Buffalo Police Department and the Erie County Sheriff's Department. Often to understand their legal rights, including Miranda and the right to legal counsel. I'm just going to ask the officers to explain Miranda and what legal rights would be and what happens when they first encounter any person who might be considered a suspect or a perpetrator.
Well, every state's a little bit different. I speak for New York State. There's levels of encounters. We use 4 levels in the state of New York. We'll go into the specifics, but essentially a policeman can walk up to anybody and talk about anything in this state. If they have reasonable suspicion, that escalates the encounter a little bit more, and they're able to ask questions about maybe why you're here or why you're doing what you're doing, or do you possess any weapons or drugs or something of that nature. You get to the area of probable cause where you can ultimately be able to make an arrest. So police officers have to be careful. They have to be knowledgeable of the law, to make sure that they don't overstep their bounds when they're encountering citizens. And it'd certainly be easy to do with a member of the disabled community if we're aware of it, whatever their disability might be.
And Captain, can you just explain the Miranda law and Miranda rights?
Yeah, Miranda is the rights that's given to everybody that's arrested under circumstances. One of the misunderstandings is we don't have to read Miranda to everybody arrested. The only time we read Miranda is if we're going to question them. A lot of people just genuinely want to talk. So if somebody's talking, it's not necessary for us to read them the Miranda rights. Make spontaneous admissions, and numerous times Miranda rights are read, and people still talk. They've been read their legal rights. And as Dave said, there's cases where a lot of people don't understand their legal rights, and probably a higher percentage of people have some sort of disability where they're not understanding what their legal rights are. And even if Miranda is read to them, they still may make admissions for statements.
So a major concern with individuals who are in the disability community relative to intellectual disability and understanding the law. The third bullet, in an attempt to please authority, may quickly confess, even if not guilty, or say what the officer wants to hear. As Captain Mann talked about earlier, the situation where he actually had an individual who was admitting to a homicide who did not do it. And in that same breath, may choose to appear bad to hide the disability. I'm familiar with a case where I did training in Westchester County, just north of New York City, where when I did the training, one of the officers talked about a gentleman who was asked to help clean out, move, in essence, help us move today. We're moving, house moving, packing up and filling the van, and they gave him $20. Except towards the end of the move, he was walking down the stairs with a TV in his hand. He was encountered by 2 police officers, the gentleman who asked them, we shouldn't call them gentlemen, the individuals who asked him to assist were well on their way. They just basically cleaned out an entire house, and here this gentleman was standing there with a TV, not knowing he was robbing the house. Many, many instances that we have that we're looking to address. Encounters and response relative to intellectual disability. Again, oftentimes a victim, we talked about the victim stats earlier, and with the intellectual disability, that actually even goes up higher to 10 to 12 times the victim of a crime, someone with intellectual disability. Offenders, and we've talked about this in varying ways. the agency that provides alternatives to incarceration, I asked them to give me a list of the parameters of the people that they work with. They assist them directly when they get into the judicial system, when they get arrested, and they noted everything from rape and sexual assault right through to robbery themselves. So it is certainly the possibility that someone with intellectual disability may be committing some very grievous crimes. 85% of individuals with intellectual disability will be in the mild range, which will be an IQ of sometime anywhere between 55 and 69. Means many individuals can function in the community independently, or for the most part independently, but when challenges come relative to either being confronted by the perpetrator or being in situations like a store where they're not quite sure, some individuals might not be quite sure of how to pay for something and might not do it appropriately. Domestic issues, as we talked about. However, many individuals will be connected to a service provider and may reside in a group home. But I want everyone to note that we developed this training today with the thought that we would have law enforcement in the audience as well as disability advocates and people from the disability community. So as you see here for our police officer audience, there is service providers, ARCs, who sponsors this program. There's a network across the country. I have a former employee of Niagara County ARC, and service providers may be able to assist or work with officers if they have questions. We encourage officers to use support staff or families for those individuals who may be a little more challenged when it comes to a domestic issue, a victimization where they were possibly a victim, or even if they were considered to be an offender, but the offense was one that might not be understood, like say going into a store and taking a candy bar, putting it in their pocket, but not doing that with the intent to steal, doing that with the intent to get a candy bar. Autism, again, people know, poses many challenges just the same. Elopement, or the person who is an escape artist, the runner, a bolter, the different terms do. The attraction to water, overstimulation, and the importance of officers understanding that their uniforms, a crowd of officers or EMTs or firefighters could be challenging. Sirens, lights, things like echolalia that might be considered very rude or disrespectful. An officer might take on if someone says repeating themselves. Lack of recognition that the person is a first responder. And then maybe walking away or not responding. How is that going to go over with most police officers? If they're not trained, it's not going to go over well. If they are trained, they're going to be able to recognize, say, autism soon enough. Avoidance of touch. Some individuals no real fear of danger, walking down subway or, throughways, right on busy roads or walking into traffic, or again, going towards water where maybe they can't swim. High pain threshold and the importance of proper restraint. We've had individuals with autism die at the hands of some officers for being restrained face down with a challenge in their trunks, a weakness in trunks, that would be of issue. Then the victimization numbers that we've talked about a few times already, often victimized repeatedly by the same individual. So they're not aware that they're being victimized. We had an incident in my agency up in Niagara County a few years back where the individual was being sexually assaulted by bus drivers but didn't know it. Was kind of going along with it for 6 months until a staff member figured out that the bus trip shouldn't have been taking that long for that person to get home. She didn't view it as anything wrong, but she certainly was being victimized. Officer is going to be usually the first one to interact. When you call 911, who's going to show up first? Many times it's going to be a police officer. Never assume that individuals with disabilities suffer less emotional trauma and psychological injury than other crime victims. We do not do a good job in supporting them from a counseling standpoint relative to trauma and psychological injury when it comes to victimization and abuse. But probably the biggest key on here relative to officer education is that communication by the officer often the key to diffusing the anxiety and getting accurate responses. We want to get that information as quick as possible, and the first one on the scene is going to be the officer, and an educated officer is going to be able to get that information. Then there's the whole side of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a federal law that police departments must adhere to. These 6 bullets are exactly what it says in the ADA relative to law enforcement. Now, if you read this, the chief and the captain would know, well, this is what we do with everyone who might be in need. But what we encourage officers to do, and we really stress with them, they need to read deeper with this relative to people with disabilities. Receiving a complaint from someone who's blind may be a different challenge relative to the witness and the questions you're going to ask or interrogating witnesses. Arresting, booking, and holding suspects, someone with seizure disorder who's going to need their medication, but that's not respected. We've had major issues with people with seizure disorder who are perished in jails because they weren't provided with medication. It wasn't considered a priority. Operating 911 centers, and the whole reason that we here at Niagara are developing the 911 operators training. We're going to roll out in 2 months. That will be a train-the-trainer. The ability for that 911 operator or dispatcher to accurately give information to the officer, the firefighter, and EMT. And what we're also providing them is talking points so that they can stay on the line with the officer, the firefighter, and EMT as they have questions. Providing emergency medical services and enforcing laws. Captain or Chief, anything you want to add relative to this slide? Okay. So the objective is to sensitize and educate as many officers as possible to the disabilities they will encounter specific in their line of work. Impact and the ability to have some staying power are essential and provide resources to ensure ongoing education and awareness. So what I'm going to do is ask Captain and Chief questions relative to this. Disability awareness training is a sensitivity training and food education. It provides a base understanding to the injustices of individuals with disabilities to whoever's in the audience, in this case specific to law enforcement. It breaks down barriers, allows people to understand the injustices and discrimination, as noted in our question earlier. It provides information to gain more knowledge on the disability community. Where do I help reach? I didn't know that there was an association, that was the Alzheimer's Association where the chapter was. I didn't know that there was a Erie County Down syndrome parent support group that might be a good group for me to connect with so I can better understand some of the challenges. I didn't know there was a self-advocacy association and active people that my police officers can interact with and learn more on their services and programs and what they might need the most. Provides information, introduces the Americans with Disabilities Act. And many officers we talk to and train are not aware of what the ADA says, say relative to getting an interpreter for someone who uses an interpreter as their main mode of communication. One of the things we say to officers is we don't want officers enforcing the law but they find themselves breaking the law. We're usually doing that and not quite understanding what the ADA says. We want to connect people to the disability organizations and advocates. So for those of you that fall under that in this webinar, it's important that you have a presence with officers as well in the community. By staying power, we simply mean that to go in and train and to walk away and say we did a good thing by training a police department today really isn't going to give them enough information to walk away with and feel comfortable relative to ongoing education. They might have got something in that 1, 2, 3 hour session. However, they're really not getting much out of it. It's just nothing left with them. They have no one to turn to ask more questions. Providing resources is essential. So law enforcement training, I'm going to go back and forth with the Chief and the Captain now. I know we have a couple more minutes for questions. We have talked about the Academy and the basic course. Sworn officers. Gentlemen, if you can talk about how to train sworn officers and how that works relative to your department. Captain Mann, I'm going to defer you at a large police department, one of the largest ones in the state, and how does that work when you train your department?
We set aside a certain amount of time to train our officers. The Buffalo Police Department has approximately 750 officers. The main thing the departments look for are response to the community. Training is important, but unfortunately it falls a little bit behind what departments want the response to be. So training is a challenge to the sworn officers. We're allowed X amount of hours per year, and then that doesn't always all work out. There's numerous times that we'll set up training, and what ends up happening is there's an event in the city that the officers, so the training gets canceled. So it's constantly a catch-up for the department to get everybody trained. There's an accreditation standard for New York State if the department's trained, and I believe it's, Chief, is it 21 hours?
Yes,
training?
there's a minimum.
As a minimum 21 hours, but in talking to even smaller departments, it's a challenge to get up to the 21 hours at times, because it's always dependent on what's going on in the department and what your manpower is at that time.
I think I had to add on to what Captain was saying. Not only is it a challenge to meet the training in general, but then as the year goes on, even the best laid plans come meet with reality. You're affected by what's happening nationally or what's happening locally in your town or city. We all had training agendas and ideas of what we wanted to accomplish before 9/11. When 9/11 hit, every department had to get better at providing and assisting with Homeland Security and making sure we were at our gas masks training, and we had all kinds of training related to Homeland Security. And again, after the Columbine and the unfortunate things that have happened in our schools, the priorities in training have turned to schools. Everyone's doing emergency rapid deployment, and there's just an awful lot to do, and generally not enough hours and funds to get it all done the way that you'd like to get it done.
And if you look at the bottom bullet point, I know we're jumping ahead here, but the hot topics, as the Chief said, unfortunately, it's the flavor of the month. After 9/11, it was terrorism, anti-terrorism, terrorism awareness, weapons of mass destruction awareness, which everything else that you wanted to train went to the back. Then it was the white powder anthrax calls, which we had to be aware of more WMD type things. What was recently with the upsurge in fatal overdoses due to heroin, it's the naloxone training that everybody's pushing out. In New York State, the State Department of Homeland Security is pushing out law enforcement survival kits for the officers based on military experience of how to handle injuries. These things come up, and these are the hot topics, and the things you want to get to seem to get pushed further back. They don't go away, but it's just a matter of trying to get them scheduled.
So maybe as a practical matter, we wanted to talk about Dave a little bit. How do you get around this? This is the reality of what's happening in law enforcement training. How do you best achieve the objective of providing this critical training? And the flexibility for me is the key. Having the ability to have trained trainer as part of this program that we've undertaken. It allows us, if something's happening at a particular time of the year, or a particular time of the day for that matter, the training can be postponed and picked up on another day, or it can be picked up at a different time of the year, or it can be gotten to at a different time if you have your own in-house trainers, and that's something that Dave's training is provided for our department. And also, the database of information that is on the website or part of the program lends support for the officer through their entire career. So that's critical for us to have the flexibility, to have the initial training be flexible, and then to have support through publications and web access. And this disability awareness training is provided for us.
One of the nice things about having dedicated trainers in this topic is, while you may not necessarily schedule a disability type training, no matter what you're training, you can cross-reference the material, the information you have, because everything seems to cross-reference in law enforcement.
One of the things we've addressed too, gentlemen, is the need for ongoing training that's required by, say, the state or the federal government, and then things that come across that are all of a sudden mandatory. Just so everyone knows, our program is not mandatory in the state of New York. We've had discussion on that. That is a very delicate topic amongst anyone you talk to once you make training mandatory, because now it will affect, the second last bullet here, overtime and budgets, where all of a sudden department of, say, Captain Mann with Buffalo 750, and Chief Askey also has one of the largest departments in the state. The town of Amherst has 153 officers in the town of Amherst. To be able to train those departments is not just a one or two day process, and scheduling in and of itself too, I'm sure, gentlemen. Absolutely. So how do you train law enforcement? I know we got to get to questions. You meet with the police chief or the sheriff, whoever is the administrator in charge. Again, you'd be a sheriff or a chief of police. So what you'll find is then the training coordinator for Buffalo. Captain Mann and I have worked closely together from the beginning here, who oversees that department, so I wouldn't necessarily be meeting with the commissioner or the police chief. But there's training coordinators in pretty much every department. Is that accurate? Absolutely. Yes. You don't want to rush the training. It is a process. It's not going to happen in the next couple of weeks. To get onto a schedule, it's going to take time. We want to connect with community resources. So we're not just training. And these are the programs. This is how we've done our programs, so that the locally people are aware. That said, I think those of you who are disability advocates on this call know that we would prefer people with disabilities to do training. It really is probably never going to work with the police department relative to getting them all the information, getting them all trained. All 750 officers in Buffalo, 153 at Amherst, even our smaller departments, 20 to 30. Correct, Captain in Chief? Is that a challenge to even smaller departments?
And sometimes smaller departments are more of a challenge. They don't have the flexibility of the bigger department.
You take 2 people off the road and there's no more police departments sometimes. I agree with that.
What we've done is develop a trainer network so that we introduce officers to connect with people from the disability community that we train with them or co-present with that officer. You need to be eclectic. Like we said, we want to go across the disability community. To go in and train on one disability topic is going to leave others out, and that doesn't always work. Sometimes we get one kick at the can. We're going into training the police department, notified the chief and the captain relative to all of the training that comes up. So we want to respect law enforcement's time, because it's you just say I'm going to go train someone on a Tuesday morning from 9 to 10, in a couple of weeks is probably going to be very difficult. And then again, we support as the captain and the chief talked about the trainer program, which allows them to own it and do it.
Anyway, I think that's one of the most important points we talk about is ideally you'd like to have the individuals with the disabilities training and giving the officers that perspective, having an impact on the officers, and giving some real perspective to what's happening. And we aren't saying that that's not a good idea to have individuals with the disabled individuals involved, but due to the time constraints and so on, you're not going to be able to have someone from every disability be there and also cover the legal aspects, your department's policy, express the experience that fellow police officers provide during that training. There's value in having law enforcement instructors. I can't give all the reasons in a short time span here, but through all the disciplines that we train in, it's generally a certified trained police instructor that provides training in everything that we do, with rare exceptions. So I would advocate for certainly some involvement from individuals with disabilities, so officers have perspective, but to think that the training can be done exclusively by individuals with disabilities probably isn't realistic.
And what we've done in our program is we built a video, so the training is done by people with disabilities through videos directly, specifically for law enforcement and for fire. We actually have different ones there. I think we're probably running out of time, Captain, so we close with our information here, and if you ever have an opportunity, you can go to our website. Did it come up? Okay, I hope it came up. I hope everyone's looking at our website.
Not yet. So if you want to do the share button at the top of your screen.
Okay.
Actually, I can see it.
Oh, you good?
Yeah.
All right, then it's just on my end.
So here's our website that anyone can access, and you can see the information we have. Here is who we are, who we're affiliated with. We also do things with relative to emergency preparedness. You can download and take many of the information that we have here. We continue to work on it. If you want to report occurrence with law enforcement, fire EMS, good, bad, ugly, we want to hear about it. If you want to join our trainer network so that we know you're interested in working with first responders for training in your area, we are going national with our program. Arkansas has signed up. We will be the second state. We're in conversation with Vermont, New Jersey now, as well. Alaska is interested. And I'm going to stop here and take questions. You can see here we have a plethora. You can just take a look yourself. And then you can also see our upcoming trainings, where we will be. These are all booked right now, and we have more that we're booking. So, Captain, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, sure. Thank you guys for a great presentation. So right now I'm going to start reading questions from the chat box. Here, let me get my video feedback too. So be ready to submit your question if you have one. And if your question is not answered during the live event, we'll be sure to follow up with you by email. So the first question that we have is, can you make any recommendations for how parents of a significant disability can build a constructive relationship with their local police department as a preventative measure?
I would say the first thing is meet with the police department. Unfortunately, a lot of our contacts with people are in the heat of the moment, you know, responding to a 911 call, get flagged down. So with kind of a busy environment, with somebody who's trying to explain to us what's going on, it's kind of difficult. So I guess it would be proactive rather than reactive.
Very kind of, Ben. I'm thinking back on one of our meetings not that long ago, one of the meetings of the association, that we actually talked about the idea that there's an affirmative responsibility on the part of the disabled individual to reach out to the police department. It's our job to serve you, to do everything that we can, but there's also an affirmative responsibility of all citizens to let us know how we can serve you better. So I would agree with that outreach on both sides.
You'll see in our, well, you won't see it unless you see the video, but one of the parents that we have talking about her daughter with autism, she states flat out in there, she has contacted her police department.
You know what you do in a police department? I can agree with this, I'm sure, from experience, that if you don't get the answer at your first try, you work your way up the ladder until you get the chief's office if you have to, and something's going to be done, and almost all the responsible departments that I'm aware of, they're going to put you on the radar.
All right, thank you. So we actually have a couple of questions that I'm going to condense into one. People are curious about what audiences you cover, specifically whether school resource and police officers are trained in these issues and corrections officers.
Great question. Actually, I'll be, the first group I ever worked with was the New York State Juvenile Police Officers Association. I'll be at their conference again the end of August. So while I mentioned we customize the training, we even customize it more within law enforcement response. So we are in the process of developing a corrections officer training because they're not first responders. So we want to make sure that it's going to be exactly what they need. I'll be spending the day in jail at the end of the month, a little bit to learn more about how that operation works. And we've begun a conversation with the New York State Commission on Corrections. So yes, we write the probation officers. I'll be at their conference next Thursday, a week from today, and that'll be a little more specific to their needs. What we're doing is using our law enforcement training as a template because they really have all of the areas, the officers that we train, law enforcement police officers that we're training, need everything that we've shown you. We are able to use that template and now customize that per group. We're developing a training just for security officers, for people who work security who are not police officers. So it's very important to give people exactly what they need. If you start going down a little bit of a road that loses their attention, some law enforcement officers, you can lose their attention pretty quickly. You might not get it back.
All right, thank you. All right, this is a tough one from the Q&A box. Please give some feedback for a trend that we're seeing where adults with developmental disabilities who are sexually assaulted are being interviewed in children's advocacy centers.
I have to admit, I'm not aware of that in Western New York.
I know we have a child advocacy center, but we have a standalone sex offense unit, and I'm not familiar with how they question. I know they're very well trained in how they question, but that one I'm not aware of.
And I'd say this also, and we can speak to Western New York, we do have an advocacy center like Captain Mann mentioned, but that doesn't preclude us from conducting investigations. And I know, at least in our department, I'm confident with Pat's also, that we tailor the interview to the individual that we have. If there's an individual with a disability or sexual assault, we're going to do that interview at our headquarters in an area that is appropriate for that interview.
Yeah, well, we'll follow up on that. And one of the things I want to stress to folks is that if you come across areas that are like this one that you have concerns with, we will address that at our program here, and we will take it to state and national levels. So for anyone who has any questions or concerns, and this is sounds like more of a concern than a question, that we will certainly take a look at addressing. And we will go to the other areas we need. I want people to keep in mind, I've been in the disability field for a long time. I'm a disability advocate, the father of a child with a disability, and the law enforcement partners, as you can see here with the chief and the captain, are working with us. We have a very close relationship, and I'll say this, they want to do it right. I think some of the concerns sometimes with people is that they see the police officer as someone that is not arm's length away, and I have to say that most of my audience has been individuals who truly care, and they are responding to our program in a very positive way, and your input is what's going to make it better.
It's a great point, Dave. I would know that if this is occurring in Western New York, please let us know. And we would, I know the district attorney's office would be amenable to any suggestions for improving their district disability centers if need be. So thank you for letting us know about that concern.
All right, thank you. And so we're right at the 2:30 mark, so I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that this web address listed down here, the firstresponders.niagara.edu, is not the correct web address. And I just posted to the chat box where you can go to check out their materials. It's frdat.niagara.edu. So just to make sure everybody can go and see your wonderful materials. And we have our next webinar is coming up the last Thursday in August, August 28th, and it'll be Alternatives to Incarceration for Criminal Offenders with Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities. And you guys can sign up at the same place you signed up for this one. And you can contact us at nccjdinfo@thearc.org. I know we didn't get to all of your questions today, but these three kind gentlemen will be able to follow up with some of you by email, and Leanne and myself and the team here at NCCJD will follow up as well. And that's the end of our program for today. Thank you all, and thank you particularly to our presenters. That was wonderful. So don't forget to register for our next webinar, and we'll see you guys next month.